Time for us to begin our class. Hope everybody's had a good week last week. Can y'all hear me okay? Yes, sir. Is that good? Okay. All right. So Tom's out of town this week, so I'll be filling in this morning, but we are going to continue our study of failures or mistakes that we see in the scriptures and those that we can learn from and how we can apply those to our lives, so hopefully not to be able to repeat those. But before we begin our study this morning, if you would, I'll ask Jerry if he would to lead us in the opening prayer for our class.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day, Lord, we have before us. Thank you for the beautiful weather that you've given to us, the beautiful summer that we've had. And Lord, we ask that you would be with us today as we open your word, learn more about that. Lord, we ask that you would watch over those that are in harm's way, bring them home safely, and those that are traveling, Lord, we ask that you be with them, help them arrive safely to their destination. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. So when Tom asked me to fill in, and I was giving some thought to, the failures in the Bible or mistakes, and one of the ones that pretty quick came to mind as one that has a lot of application to our lives today, and that is the one around Jacob and Esau. So we'll be focused today on Jacob and Esau. If you want to be turning in your Bibles, we'll be around chapter 25 of the book of Genesis. So this is an interesting event, and it's a long story, and the results have long-lasting impacts long after the main characters of this story pass on from this life. And there are many failures and many mistakes that we're going to highlight and that we're going to look at in this series of events. But I think it's also going to be important for us to key on that we're going to be able to see and become more aware of the amazing grace of God through this series of events. And we're going to see how God works through frail and flawed human beings to have his plan continue and to come into play. How he calls, how he blesses, and how he uses people that are flawed and frail, not because they're deserving of it, okay, not because they're worthy of it, but it's in spite of their weaknesses, in spite of their flaws. God is still able to use them. And we're going to see a lot of tendencies throughout this account where we discuss misplaced priorities, favoritism, trickery, deception, things that I think at some point in time in our lives, each of us can relate to one or a few or maybe all of these kind of characteristics and how they've impacted our lives and how we need to prevent these from happening in the future. So let's begin. Again, this account covers several chapters in the book of Genesis. So we're just going to try to pull out some key verses so that we can get the full picture for our discussion this morning. So we're going to begin in Genesis chapter 25, and we'll start with verse 27. So if you will, follow along with me. Genesis 25, beginning in verse 27. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had the taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "Behold, I am about to die, So of what use then is the birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, if you will, move over to chapter 27, and we'll begin in verse 5. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me two choice young goats. Bring me two choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death. Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am smooth. Perhaps my father will feel me, then I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, your curse be on me, my son. You only obey my voice, and go then for them. And then we'll drop down to verse 18 of chapter 27. Then he came to his father and said, my father? And he said, here am I. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me. Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come close, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. So he said, bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game, that I may bless you. And he brought it to him, and he ate, and he also brought him wine and drank. And then go over to verse 30. Now it came about as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had hardly gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Then he also made savory food and brought it to his father, and he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. Isaac his father said to him, who are you? And he said, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Then Isaac trembled violently and said, who was he then that hunted game and brought it to me, so that I ate of all of it before he came and blessed him? Yes, he shall be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing. Then he said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And then finally, in chapter 27, look at verse 41. So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So again, we see there's a whole lot to unpack in these verses, but the full chapters. And if you're not familiar or you haven't read this in a while, I encourage you to go back and read all 3 or 4 of these chapters. But the first thing to kind of view and point out of this is God's people can create problems when they set aside God's ways in order to achieve their own way. It's very possible, and one of the things that supports this, it's very possible that parental favoritism kind of contributed underlying to this whole situation. The scriptures tell us early in what we read, Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, the scriptures don't imply or state that they had any hard feelings or felt, evil towards the other, but there was very clearly a preferred or a preference in which of the two that each of the parents, liked. We also see that Esau was not a very spiritually minded person. If somebody would be turning over to Hebrews chapter 12. But Esau lived primarily for, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. He lived in the moment. And we'll see this. If somebody gets to Hebrews chapter 12, read verses 15 and 16 for us.
Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this meaning become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright.
Okay. So we certainly see, and God certainly knew, that Esau was not going to be the kind of leader that was going to set the proper example for his people. And that was not the kind of person that he wanted leading them. We also see, and I think it's interesting, the way Esau, early on when he's trying to get the stew from Jacob, how he overstates his situation, how he overstates his predicament. How does the text describe, when Esau first comes in from hunting, how does the text describe him? What word is used? Okay, he's famished. He's starving. Okay, he's hungry. Okay, which just implies, okay, that you're hungry. When Esau describes his situation, he is, I'm about to die. And he kind of takes it to the extreme, okay, that I'm about to die. And because I'm going to die, well, then this birthright really is of no value to me, okay? So when he overstates his situation, he really makes himself very vulnerable to deception and to temptation. And the same thing can be applied to us. If we think things are so much worse than they actually are, or we blow things way out of proportion, at that time we can tend to open ourselves up more to deception and more to temptation. And so we've got to be careful that we kind of see things for how they truly are and not make more out of them. But we see that this is where we begin to see the real weakness in Esau's character. Okay, and how he, in the way he regards just the basic priorities of life, okay, that having a meal right now in this moment is more important than my entire future. It's more important than my birthright. Okay, so he very much is living there, which also shows that he has a lack of faith in God being able to take care of him in that moment, and that his birthright is of less value to him than the meal that he needs right now to satisfy this hunger, this immediate urge that he has. Now, we're certainly not saying, and we're going to get into Jacob's life a whole lot more in detail, or Jacob in this situation a lot more, but we're not saying that Jacob is blameless or has flawless character, because he certainly wasn't. But we will see that Jacob at least had the potential for spiritual leadership. And so we've got to be careful, and one of the things I think we can learn from is we've got to be careful that what makes us feel good, okay, what may satisfy us in this moment in time may not necessarily align with God's will. May not necessarily be what's best for us long term. And I think we see that in this situation with Esau. He was so focused on this instant that he didn't take into account any of the consequences, and did this align with God's will? Okay. Could God take care of me in this situation? You know, and what are the consequences if I do sell my birthright, if I basically give it away? So the second point out of these events is God's people are not to use deceptive and manipulative actions, even in the attempt to guarantee God's plan is fulfilled. Okay? Now, it's difficult for us to truly know what Rebekah's motives were in this situation. Okay? On the surface, they seem very genuine. They seem very spiritual. Okay? And they seem, very focused on a positive thing. Turn over to in chapter 25 of Genesis and look at verse 23. So this is God speaking to Rebekah. Genesis 25:23. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Okay? Rebekah knew, that Jacob was the chosen one of God. God specifically tells her, she knows this, okay? So she's trying to ensure that things are done right and that God's will is done. Now, the one thing that we don't see in verse 23 or anywhere else in the scriptures is God saying, oh, and by the way, Rebekah, if I get busy doing something else, or if I forget about Jacob, I need you to make sure you got my back. Okay, I need you to take care of things because I may get busy over here and I may forget about Jacob. We don't see that. Okay, so she takes things into her own hands, and it's because of her lack of faith in God that regardless of the situation, God's going to fulfill his plan. God is going to take care of things. Things are going to happen exactly the way he wants them to happen, okay? But she didn't have the faith that that was going to take place. And so when she goes about trying to do the right thing, she does it in the wrong way. And she goes about and deceives her husband, Isaac. She encourages and directs her son to deceive his father. And all of this, again, thinking of the consequences, how much pain, how much heartache, how much misery does she bring into her family because she's trying to help God out with his plan. Yes, ma'am? When we try to take over for God, whenever we see examples of us taking over for God, because God needs our help, there's usually nothing good that comes out of that. Okay, there's usually nothing good, and we see the messes and the pain and all that is created by that. I think what we've got to remember that Rebekah didn't remember is God can use the good and the bad to work towards fulfilling his ultimate purpose, his ultimate plan. What does Romans 8:28 tell us? The good things work for those things, right? Just the good things. All things. The good things and the bad things. Okay? Now, that does not provide us or give us a free pass to sin or to do the wrong. That, okay, well, I can do whatever I want to because, God's plan is going to work out anyway. That's not what Romans 8:28 is telling us. It's not, okay, just live how you want to live, do whatever you want to do. God's going to work it out. Okay, it's not a free pass. What we see, Rebecca's mistake and her basic flaw was she just didn't trust God that he was going to take care of it. He told her which one of her sons was his preferred. He was very clear with that. And she should have had the mindset of, I know what's happening and what Isaac is saying in the other room. That doesn't go along with what God's plan is, but I'm sure that he's going to work this out right. But in her impatience, she used these deceptive methods in order to control the situation and kind of take over for God. Is that one of those situations that we can relate to? Do we ever get impatient with God? Or think, there's really a better way to do this?
Keeps reminding me of struck the rock.
It's like, you're just going to do it, and minor as it may be, the consequences are, you can, like you said, that God's plan is always going to happen. There's going to be consequences for those who do not do it as instructed.
And do we justify those things and those actions in our mind because our end goal is not evil, it's not wrong. We're doing this for God's good. And so do we use that to convince ourselves, that, hey, this is okay because I'm doing it for good. This is really what God wants, but I want to do it my way.
Hey, James, I think it's such a hard line to walk because it's so much, we live in a day and age now where so many people lack ambition or they're lazy, they don't push themselves or others. And it's like, you could wake up with a lot of skill, be bold for the Lord, trying to get a lot done. But you can quickly cross that line and rationalize it to yourself where you're not, you think you're doing right in God's will, but it's such a hard line to walk, I think.
Absolutely. And great segue, okay? God's people sometimes can appear to achieve success, but do it through deceitful and deceptive efforts. But in the end, they often pay a heavy price for that. You talk about ambition. Did Jacob have ambition? Absolutely. Very clear from the very beginning that we see his level of ambition throughout this whole ordeal. And he uses that and he begins by taking advantage of his brother's situation. He sees that his brother is hungry. He may be, blowing it all out of proportion. He may be thinking that he's just, minutes away from dying because he's so hungry. But Jacob took advantage of that. He saw how vulnerable he was, and he is the one that initiated it. Esau didn't say, hey, I want a bowl of stew. I'll give you my birthright for it. I want a bowl of stew. Well, if you'll sell me your birthright, give me your birthright, then I'll do that. So he demanded that and took advantage of it. So we kind of get a glimpse of the character of Jacob, how he is calculating and how he took advantage of this situation to cheat his brother. He was also well aware, Jacob was, of what his mother was asking him to do, was he not? He knew that she was getting him to deceive his father. And he even saw the kind of the flaw in her plan, okay? Just cooking the meal isn't going to be enough. If he reaches out and grabs my hand, what in the world am I going to do? So he's not just, following her, but he's actually participating in planning the deception because he's kind of thinking through, okay, there may be some, flaws here that we've got to cover. And now, the one thing that they didn't think about, either one of them, was apparently there was a distinct difference in their voices, okay, because Isaac did pick up on that. But as Bach pointed out, is ambition a bad thing? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It can be used for good. A person can have ambition, can work hard, and can achieve a great deal of success in this life, and that success can be used to bless their families, bless God's kingdom, bless the community, bless others around them, okay? But we've got to be able to keep that ambition focused where? God's will. You know, and that wasn't where Jacob's ambition was focused. It was more focused on, how do I get this birthright? How do I get this blessing?
All these guys are really self-centered. Really self-centered, instead of wanting what's best for anybody else, without regard for anybody else, even though they're family.
Good point. So when we cross that line of ambition, that's where, and we become overly ambitious, like Jacob, then that's where we can begin to kind of take shortcuts, that we can try to achieve our goals, achieve our objectives through a means of deception, through trickery, and all. And that's where, and you see this real clear in Jacob's. You know, once he got started with our kids, Renee used to call it the snowball effect, okay? Once you start down the hill, it's just going to keep, you got to find some way to slow it down, because you're just building, okay? And this is going to make this worse, and this is going to make this worse, and this is going to make that worse. And by the time it gets, you got this huge snowball. And you see that with Jacob. Once he started deceiving and lying, well, then one lie just led to another lie that led to another lie, and that led, to another one. And so this is where what makes this, when we're focused on this immediate gratification, we just open ourselves up to being deceived as well. Even the person that is being deceptive ends up being deceived by Satan. And we just open ourselves up, and we become vulnerable in these situations to just greater temptation. And once you kind of cross that line, how hard is it to cross it again?
Easier.
Becomes easier. And then you cross that line, and then, well, hey, I've already come this far. You know, that's really not that much more. And then you wake up, and how in the world did I get over here? You know, very seldom, and I use this in thinking, in a way that, okay, because there's really not a line, but, very seldom do you just jump way over here. You know, it starts, and the closer I hug the line, even though I'm across it, the more I'm able to convince myself that I'm really not in that bad a shape. And then I've just moved the line. And then it's easier to cross that one, and it's easier to cross that one. And then you wake up, and you're way across, and you're way out of alignment. And you think, well, I would have done that. But it's a whole lot easier for us to do it in kind of these baby steps as we go. The next thing, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, is God is able to bring about blessings in believers' lives in spite of the danger and difficulties that they bring upon themselves. Okay? So in spite of our mistakes, in spite of our flaws, God has the ability and will fulfill his plan and complete his purpose. Okay? And we see every person in this whole story, okay, in this whole series of events, is sinful and flawed and is a contributor in some way. So a question is, was God unjust in blessing Rebekah's scheme to deceive her husband? Have you ever asked yourself that question? You know, all this came about through Rebekah's deceit. But God continued and blessed that. Was he unjust in that? Did he reward her?
No, I don't think he's unjust. We're told in unquestioned Bible that God uses people to fulfill his plan. And he used power to fulfill his plan. There's a parable of the unjust steward. I remember many times I've read that, why is that in here? And why is he commended for his deceitfulness? And yet, it accomplishes the purpose. And that's what God is doing with these people. He's using them to accomplish his purpose. We can't necessarily see and understand it, but God doesn't see things the way we do. And we just have to accept what he's doing and then try to look for wisdom in it. We may never fully understand it.
Have you ever caught yourself questioning why someone else appears to have blessings in this world when you kind of know a little bit about them and you know how they are? Why is that person being blessed? Why do they get that? Did you see what they did last week? Did you see what they did last night? Have you ever caught yourself wondering about that? You know? Do you think Esau ever questioned, wait a minute, God, did you not see what just took place over here? You know, and you're going to let him go ahead and have the blessing? Think Esau questioned that? I mean, I would think he had to, wondering, how is this justifiable? How do we make sense of this? Ma'am? Certainly this is a character, this is a situation that we can relate to. What we've got to understand is God's plan is going to work out. And he has the ability and he will use and bless those that are undeserving and those that are sinful. I mean, he used Abraham, he used Isaac, he used Jacob. One thing, this was who he had to work with. There is nobody other than Jesus that's ever been perfect and sinless in this life. So if we say, well, God, you can only use those that don't make mistakes. Well, his pool is real shallow, because those people don't exist. Okay? But God does, and he can, and so these are the best people. And so again, he can use us, as flawed as we may be, as mistake-riven as we may be. He can still use us and will use us because in the end, his plan and his purpose, is going to be fulfilled. But we also understand that even though we may, Jacob received this blessing, was Jacob's life smooth sailing? There were some consequences that came from this, were there not?
This was a blessing from his father.
Mm-hmm.
Did they look at this as a blessing from God or just their father?
Yeah, no, this was in their view. I think they viewed this because it was done, as he said in here, I'm blessing you in the presence of the Lord. So yes, I think it was twofold that this is, and that's why it couldn't be, hey, once he even learned the mistake, it couldn't be undone. Okay, and I think the other thing along those lines, as I was studying this even more in detail, it appears, I think, that the birthright and this blessing on the deathbed, so to speak, are two different things, okay? Because he points out that he has taken this from me twice. So he could have sold the birthright, which he did, and he could have still received the blessing there. So they do appear to be, two completely, in that society or that realm, two completely different items, I think.
If his father found out or discovered his little scheme here, he would bring a curse on himself.
Yeah, so he knew the consequences, and so that's what he was, what the potential was there. But Esau bore a grudge against his brother. We saw that when we read in verse 41 that, my dad's going to die soon, and when he's gone, I'm coming after you. I'm coming after you. And, Brian?
Jacob remembered that many, many years. When they do finally meet, he's still got the guilt of what he's done. I think his brother's going to take, complete what he said.
Yeah, because, he bore a grudge. It was, a persistent hatred. It was almost an oath that he professed, to murder him. And so Jacob flees from him. But as Jacob's story continues, he kind of meets up with somebody that's a little more deceptive and a little better at trickery than he even was, doesn't he? His future father-in-law kind of got so Jacob's now on the receiving end of this. And as, people talk about karma, okay? Hey, now it's your time here. And so he meets his future father-in-law that's a little better at this game than even Jacob was. So, but as we find ourselves in most of these situations, do we think those things through? Do we play out when we're making a decision, when we're in these situations, do we really think what the long-term consequences will be? Why do you think that's the case? Okay.
We're prone to want reward in the present, not now. And it's not so easy to sit back and wait, especially when you don't know how long it's going to take things to come about.
Like you said, we live in a world of instant gratification. We live in a world where, I make a decision for what I can get today instead of putting our time and our effort on this into the future. It's easier for us to, where we won't know, where we have to rely on God. We have to think that in the end, it will be okay. We make those decisions based on what we know today.
If I think those consequences all the way through, what probably happens? We don't get to do what we want to do. So I'll think the consequences through up until I get to that one that's supposed to change my mind, and then, okay, here we go. Well, everything looks good. I'm good to go. When you kind of see over the fence and you see that one that's and if I really talk that one out, I just lost my advantage. Then, because I don't want anything to keep me from doing what I want to do. When we have this self-centered and it's my world and all, then I'm going to talk through it as long as I don't get talked out of it. And I think that's another reason that we don't play these things out, is because if I think about this too long, I might not get to do that. So as we wrap up, 3 questions for us to ask ourselves to hopefully prevent us from making these mistakes is, what are we willing to sell our birthright for? Okay. Our birthright is what? Eternal life in heaven. Okay? Every day we're making countless decisions on whether or not we're going to sell our birthright or not. And so what are we willing to sell our birthright for? You know, and do we make the situation so much worse that it justifies selling it, so to speak? You know, but what are we willing to sell our birthright for? Second question is, do we ever try to take over for God and help work out his plan? You know, God, I know you need me. You know, you kind of got the structure here real good, but I think I can add a lot to this plan. I think I can really get it home for you, you know. See, God doesn't need our help. What he needs is our obedience. And there's really nothing that I can do to help God out, you know. And a large part is because, you know, have you ever tried to help somebody and you mean good and you think you're going, but you just didn't know everything about the situation? And, well, if I had known that, I would have done, you know. And so a lot of times, God doesn't need our help because we just really don't know everything in order for us to stick our nose into his business, so to speak. And I've caught myself even in, you know, helping somebody else out. And I think, oh, yeah, here I'm going. And they're like, why did you do this? Well, that's what you needed. Who's told you that? Well, I just assumed that that's what you were needing. Well, you know, I appreciate it, but that didn't help me out any. So we've got to understand everything, and we've got to understand that God simply just needs our obedience. And then the third and final question to ask ourselves, do we justify our actions because we've convinced ourselves that there's a spiritual benefit to this, and as long as the end result is right and is good and is just, then my actions don't matter as much. And we use the end to justify the means, so to speak, when everything has to align with God's plan. Our actions to get there and the ultimate plan, you know, does. So hopefully, again, I mentioned earlier, as I look at this, these are all, this situation, you know, you're talking about ambition, you're talking about greed, you're talking about selfishness, deceitfulness. You know, I didn't have to look real hard to kind of try to figure out how this impacts my life, how I may have slipped into some of these mistakes as well. So hopefully you see that and we learned something from this, you know, from this event. Just a couple minutes before the bell, any final thoughts or comments before we dismiss?
Justify. You can justify about anything. If that's what you want, you can justify it.
Absolutely.
You can justify going out buying a new Rolls Royce or something, although it'd be a pretty stupid thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not hard to do. When you start with the end, you can, you know, you start with the answer, you can figure out what the right questions are that's going to lead you there. This is what I'm going to do regardless. You know, you're almost like, okay, well, just save yourself some time and go do it. You know, don't talk yourself into it. You already are going to do that. Yes, sir.
You do have a prayer in the Bible that tells us what we really need to do. We can justify anything, but, you know, you got to live and make sure it's right. You know, God did lay us a plan. Anything we need to know is in that word.
And I think that's an excellent point, and that's the bottom line to all this. If we have faith that God is going to do what he says he's going to do, what else do we need? Nothing. I appreciate your participation and your comments. I think Tom will be back next week to continue. So thank you again.